I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president just sawed through my nephew's treehouse while he was still inside. And her excuse, she called it removing an eyesore. Funny thing is, the only thing removed that day was my self-control when I saw him in the back of that ambulance. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Mark Hale. Most days that doesn't mean much. It's just a name you put on paperwork. But on the day the world decided to fall on my nephew, it meant everything. It meant I was the guy who was there, the guy who had to fix it. My sister, she worries. It's her job. She's a mom. My job since I got back from the army and moved in to help out is to not worry. Evan's dad works out of state for months at a time. Day to day, it's me and my sister. My job is to be the calm one, the steady hand, to build the things that need building and fix the things that get broken. That morning, we were building. Evan, who is 8 years old and has more energy than a whole platoon, was my foreman. Our project was a tree fort, a real tree house, a raised platform between two sturdy oaks in our side yard that faces the lake set on 4x4 posts about 5 ft off the grass. We used good wood, thick posts, and deck screws, not nails. I taught him how to measure, how to hold a hammer. He'd get a screw started, and I'd drive it home with the drill. It was our thing. The wood smelled like pine and hard work. The sun was warm. It was a good day. We had a rhythm. He'd grab a board. I'd mark the cut. He'd hold it steady, I'd saw. The pile of scrap grew, and so did our little castle. It had a floor, 3 walls, and a crooked window he designed himself. He called it Fort Kickbutt. His mom was not thrilled with the name, but I told her it was a matter of strategic defense. You need a name that scares the enemy. Our only enemy, or so I thought, was Karen Dunn. She was the president of our homeowners association, HOA for short. Karen believed a perfect neighborhood was one where every blade of grass stood at attention and saluted. Our fort, a glorious monument to an 8-year-old's imagination, was in her eyes a violation, a blight, an unapproved structure. She'd left notes, nasty little things, tucked under our welcome mat, written in an angry, slanted script. I'd read them, fold them neatly, and use them to help start the grill. I figured it was a battle of attrition. She'd run out of expensive stationery before I ran out of charcoal. That day, she escalated. She didn't leave a note. She walked right up to the edge of our lawn, her hands on her hips, her face tight. She wore a power suit even on a Saturday. It looked ridiculous next to our half-built fort and the happy mess of sawdust and tools. "Mark," she said, her voice like gravel in a blender. "This is your final warning. That thing violates 17 different covenants." Evan stopped hammering and looked at her, then at me. I gave him a little nod. "It's okay." "Morning, Karen," I said, keeping my voice easy. 17? That's impressive. You must have been up all night reading the rule book." Her eyes narrowed. "I am not joking. This is a formal notice. You have 24 hours to dismantle it, or the association will take action." I picked up a 2x4, checked it for straightness. "And what action would that be, Karen? Are you going to send a strongly worded letter? Maybe fine us $50. She pointed a finger at the fort. A finger with a perfect blood-red nail. "You will see. This neighborhood has standards. Your project is an eyesore. It lowers property values." I just looked at her. I thought about my time overseas, the things I'd seen, the real problems in the world. And here was this woman wound up tighter than a watching about to declare war over a kid's fort. My best friend Dave, he would have found this hilarious. He had a way of cutting through the noise. "Hale," he'd say, "some people just need a hobby." Karen Dunn's hobby was power, and she was about to get a lesson in overreach. "It's a fort for my nephew, Karen," I said, my voice flat. "It's not hurting anyone. Leave it be." She gave a little huff, a sound of pure indignation, and spun on her heel. She marched back to her own perfect house with its own perfect lawn and its complete lack of joy. Evan looked at me, his eyes wide. "Is she going to break our fort, Uncle Mark?" I put my hand on his shoulder. "Nobody. She's just full of hot air. Now let's get this roof on. A good fort needs a roof." We worked for another hour. We got the last wall up and were starting on the rafters. Evan was inside pretending he was a king in his castle, making decrees about mandatory ice cream and no bedtime. I was on the outside measuring a crossbeam. That's when I heard it. It started as a high-pitched whine, a power tool. I frowned, looking around. Then I saw her. Karen Dunn was back. She was standing right next to the fort, and she was holding a reciprocating saw. The blade was a blur of silver. It was already biting into one of the main support posts. My blood went cold. "Karen, stop!" I shouted, dropping my tape measure and running toward her. Evan's inside. Stop. She didn't even look at me. Her face was a mask of grim determination. She was focused on her work, on the destruction. The saw screamed. Then came a different sound. A sound I will never forget. The crack of splintering wood. A loud, sickening groan as the structure gave way. And then Evan's scream. It wasn't a play scream. It was real. It was terror. The fort, our beautiful half-built castle, twisted and collapsed on itself. It fell in a heap of lumber and shattered dreams. And my nephew was under it. For a split second, the world went silent. All I could see was the pile of wood and Karen Dunn standing there, the saw still humming in her hand, a puff of sawdust settling around her like a foul mist. My training, my instincts, everything in me screamed to neutralize the threat. But my heart screamed louder. It screamed my nephew's name. I didn't go for her. I went for the wreckage. I threw boards aside, my hands raw, shouting for Evan. He was crying, a hurt, scared sound that tore right through me. I finally saw him pinned under a heavy beam. His leg bent at an angle that was all wrong. His red shirt was torn and dusty. The next few minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. My first aid training kicked in. Check breathing. Keep him still. Talk to him. I'm here, buddy. I've got you. We're going to get you out. Neighbors were running out of their houses. Paul from next door, a good man, was already on the phone with 911. Mrs. Gwynn from across the street was standing on her porch, her hand over her mouth, a silent, horrified witness. Karen Dunn just stood there, the saw now dangling from her hand, her face a strange mix of shock and triumph. As if she couldn't believe what she'd done, but was still glad she'd done it. The sirens grew louder. An ambulance and a police car pulled up. The EMTs were professionals, calm and efficient. They took over, stabilizing Evan, cutting his pant leg away to see the damage. A deputy stepped out of the cruiser. His name tag read Torres. He had a calm, no-nonsense look about him. He took one look at the scene, the collapsed fort, the crying child, me kneeling in the wreckage, and Karen Dunn holding a power tool. He didn't have to ask many questions. Mrs. Gwynn was already talking, her voice shaky but clear, pointing at Karen. She did it. I saw the whole thing. She cut it down with that saw while the little boy was inside. Deputy Torres walked over to Karen. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Ma'am, I need you to put the saw down." Karen seemed to snap out of her trance. "This is my property." Well, association property. That structure was illegal. I was within my rights. Torres didn't argue. He just spoke again, a little firmer this time. "Ma'am, put the saw down." She let it clatter into the grass. He took her arm. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault and child endangerment." The click of the handcuffs was one of the most satisfying sounds I have ever heard. Deputies arrest. The district attorney files the felony charges. She started to screech then, a torrent of excuses and threats. She name-dropped the mayor. She threatened lawsuits. Torres just ignored it, leading her to the back of his car. As they loaded Evan onto a stretcher, he looked at me, his face pale with pain, tears streaming down his cheeks. "She broke Fort Kickbot, Uncle Mark," he whispered. I squeezed his hand. "We'll build it back, buddy. I promise. Stronger than before." The ambulance doors closed and it pulled away, its lights flashing. I stood there covered in sawdust and fury, watching the police car take Karen Dunn away. Later at arraignment, the judge set bail and a strict no-contact order. Stay 300 FT from us in our home. No meetings and no messages through others. But I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, this was just the beginning. A piece of paper wasn't going to stop a woman like that. We had the arrest, but we were going to need more than that. We were going to need proof so solid, so undeniable that she couldn't squirm her way out of it. We needed to show exactly what she did second by second. The day after the arrest, my house became a command center. It was quiet, too quiet. Evan was at the hospital with his mom. They were setting his leg. A clean break in the tibia. The doctors said he'd be in a cast for months. He was lucky. They said it could have been so much worse. Lucky. The word echoed in my head. I didn't feel lucky. I felt a cold, simmering anger that I hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of anger you have to control, have to channel, or it will eat you alive. My mission was clear. Build a case against Karen Dunn. Not just for the police, but for us, for Evan. I needed to create a narrative, a timeline so precise and backed by evidence that no lawyer could twist it. My first call was to Paul, my neighbor. He's a single dad, an IT guy. Steady, smart, and dependable. The kind of guy you want next to you in a trench, or in this case, in a suburban cul-de-sac. He came over with his laptop and a grim look on his face. "How's Evan?" he asked, setting his gear up on my kitchen table. "He'll be okay," I said. "But he's scared. He keeps having nightmares about the noise, the feeling of it falling." Paul nodded, his jaw tight. "What do you need, Mark?" "Everything," I said. "I need a timeline. I want to sync every piece of digital evidence we have. Your doorbell camera for starters. It points right at my yard. You also have the driveway camera aimed at the side yard by the oaks. That's the one that caught everything." Paul was already clicking away. "Already pulled it. The motion sensor triggered the moment Karen stepped onto your lawn. It recorded the whole thing." He turned the laptop toward me. There it was. A wide-angle, slightly distorted view of the side yard by the oaks. The colors were washed out, but the image was clear. We saw Karen march up to the fort. We saw her raise the saw. We could see me in the background measuring a board. We saw Evan's little head pop up in the fort's window just seconds before she started cutting. My stomach clenched. He was right there, visible. She had to have seen him. There was no way she didn't. We watched the whole horrible event unfold again in silent, damning clarity. The cut, the collapse, my frantic dash into the frame. The video ended when the first responders arrived. "Okay," I said, my voice. "That's one angle. Now we need the other one." I had already filed a public records request for Deputy Torres's body cam footage. In our state, it's accessible, especially when you're a party to the incident. It took a few days of forms and follow-ups, but I got a secure link to the file. It was a large download. We threw both clips on the TV, doorbell left, body cam right. Paul synced them in under a minute. Freeze frame Evan's head in the window. Play. Karen glances up right at him. Then the blade kisses the post. I tasted metal. "There's your intent," Paul said. "Director's cut." I said felony edition, but we needed more than just video. We needed the human element. That's where Mrs. Gwynn came in. I walked across the street. She was watering her roses, but her hands were shaking. She's a widow. Lived on this street for 40 years. Seen it all, she says. But not this. "Mrs. Gwynn," I started, "I know this is hard, but would you be willing to walk me through what you saw?" She put down her watering can and looked at me, her eyes sharp and clear. "I'd be happy to, Mark. That woman is a menace. What she did to that sweet boy, it's evil." We sat on her porch swing. I had a notepad. She didn't need any prompting. She described the color of the saw, the sound it made, the determined look on Karen's face. She even remembered what I was wearing. Her memory was photographic. "I was watching you and Evan all morning." She said it was so lovely seeing you two build that thing together. When I saw her march over there with that weapon, I knew she was up to no good. I almost called 911 right then. I wrote it all down. Her statement perfectly matched the doorbell video. She was the narrator for our silent movie. I spent the rest of the day putting it all together. I edited the two videos, putting them side by side in a single file. I used simple titles. 10:14:22 a.m., suspect approaches structure. 10:14 a.m., victim visible inside structure. 10:148 a.m., suspect begins cutting primary support. It was cold, clinical, methodical. That was the point. I wanted to strip away all the emotion and just leave the hard, brutal facts. I made copies. One for the district attorney, one for my own lawyer for the civil suit that was sure to come, and one for my sister so she could see that we had a case, a rock-a-lid, airtight case. When she watched it, she cried. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of anger and of hope. "You're going to get her right, Mark?" she asked, wiping her eyes. I looked at the screen at the frozen image of Karen Dunn's face captured by the deputy's camera. A face that showed no remorse, only arrogance. "Yeah," I said, "we are." The evidence was locked down. The videos were saved. The witness statement was transcribed. We had the what and the how completely nailed. But a bigger question still loomed, one that gnawed at me. Why? Why would anyone do this? It was more than just a fight over neighborhood rules. This was something else, something uglier. And I had a feeling the answer was buried somewhere in the HOA's dirty laundry. The no-contact order was supposed to create a buffer, a zone of safety around my family. But a piece of paper is only as strong as the respect a person has for the law. Karen Dunn, it turned out, had none. She saw rules as things that applied to other people. The HOA called a special community meeting. The official reason was to discuss recent events and reaffirm community standards. The unofficial reason was damage control. The story had hit the local news. Our quiet little street was suddenly famous for all the wrong reasons. News vans were parked down the block. Reporters were knocking on doors. The HOA board was panicking. They booked the local elementary school gymnasium. I decided to go. Not to speak, just to watch, to listen, to take the temperature of the neighborhood. Paul came with me. My sister stayed at the hospital with Evan. He was getting his bright red cast put on. He'd requested a superhero theme. I walked into that gym and the air was thick with tension. It smelled like floor wax and anxiety. Half the neighborhood was there. People were clustered in small groups whispering. I saw the rest of the HOA board at a table up front. They all looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The vice president, a quiet man named Arthur, was nervously shuffling papers. The meeting started. Arthur mumbled his way through a prepared statement about community and safety. It was corporate nonsense. Then he opened the floor to questions. It was a disaster. People were angry. They were shouting about property values, about safety, about the HOA's liability. Through it all, I just sat in the back listening. And then the back doors of the gym burst open. In walked Karen Dunn. A collective gasp went through the crowd. She was supposed to be at home and barred from any event where I'd be. She was violating a court order right there in front of 100 witnesses. She looked terrible. Her hair was a mess. Her eyes were wild. She marched straight for the stage, snatched the microphone from a stunned Arthur, and turned to face the crowd. "You people have no idea," she shrieked, her voice echoing through the gym. "I am the victim here. I have dedicated years to this community, to maintaining our standards, and this is the thanks I get." She was unraveling. Deputy Torres was there, assigned to keep the peace at the meeting. He started moving toward the stage, his hand on his radio, his face a mask of weary professionalism. He'd seen this show before. I stayed put. My training taught me to identify all threats in a room. And my eyes weren't just on Karen, they were on the man standing near the exit. A man I recognized from photos as her adult son, a hot-headed kid named Kyle with a reputation for trouble. He was watching his mother's meltdown and his hands were clenched into fists. He looked like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Karen pointed a shaking finger out into the crowd somewhere in my direction. "He is the problem. Him and his trashy little shack." He provoked me. He flaunted the rules. Torres was on the stage now trying to talk to her. "Ma'am, you're in violation of a court order. You need to come with me now." But Karen wasn't listening to him. She was lost in her own storm of self-pity. And that's when her son Kyle made his move. He saw Torres putting a hand on his mother's arm and he snapped. "Get your hands off my mom," he screamed. He reached into the waistband of his jeans and he pulled out a gun. The world seemed to slow down. The murmur of the crowd died into a dead silence. All you could hear was the hum of the overhead lights. I saw the gun, a small snub-nosed revolver. I saw the fear in the eyes of the people around me. I saw Torres immediately shift his stance, creating distance, his own hand now on his service weapon. My body tensed. I was calculating the distance between me and Kyle, the number of steps, the likely trajectory if he fired. But this wasn't my fight to lead. This was law enforcement's territory. 2 other deputies who had been by the main entrance were moving now, flanking, their movements fluid and practiced. They were a team. "Son, put the gun down," Torres said, his voice unbelievably calm. It was a command, not a request. He wasn't talking to Karen anymore. His entire focus was on the new, bigger threat. Kyle was waving the gun around, pointing it at the ceiling, then at Torres. "You're not taking her." "None of you are," he yelled, his voice cracking. This was the moment it could all go wrong. A moment of panic, a sudden move, and shots would be fired. The deputies were de-escalating, using their training. They didn't draw their weapons. They used their voices. "Nobody wants to hurt you, Kyle," the female deputy said, her voice steady. "Nobody wants to hurt your mom. Just put the gun on the floor. We can talk this through." It felt like an eternity. Kyle's eyes darted back and forth between the deputies and his mother, who was now sobbing. He was cornered out of his depth. He was a scared kid with a deadly weapon. Finally, something in him broke. His shoulders slumped. The gun wavered in his hand. "Just put it down, son," Torres repeated, his voice gentle but firm. Kyle slowly lowered his arm and placed the gun on the polished wooden floor. The instant it was down, the deputies moved. It was a blur of motion. They were on him, securing him, cuffing him. It was over in seconds. No shots fired, no one hurt, just professional textbook de-escalation. Torres, meanwhile, put the cuffs back on Karen Dunn. This time, there was no fight left in her. She was just a crumpled, weeping mess. They led both of them out of the gym. The silence they left behind was deafening. The meeting was over. People started to file out, their faces pale with shock. Paul looked at me. "You were calm through all that," he said, his own voice a little shaky. I just shrugged. "Seen worse," I said. But inside I was thinking about Evan, about how this woman's chaos, her complete disregard for rules and decency, was now spreading. It was pulling in her own family. It was escalating. We had her on video. We had her violating a court order. We had her son pulling a gun in a crowded room. The case against her was getting stronger by the minute, but I still didn't have the one thing I really needed to understand. I still didn't have the motive. Why risk everything for a kid's fort? The answer, I suspected, was not going to be found in a public meeting. It was going to be found in her secrets. The meltdown at the gym changed things. Karen Dunn was no longer just a neighborhood nuisance. She was a menace, a genuine flight risk, and a danger to the public. Her bail was reviewed and significantly increased. Her son Kyle was facing serious felony charges. The Dunn family was in a world of trouble, all of their own making. But the central question still bothered me. The why of it all. Her reaction was so over the top, so disproportionate to the situation. Destroying a kid's fort and injuring him in the process, all because it violated some HOA bylaw. It didn't add up. There had to be something more, a motive buried deeper than just a desire for tidy lawns. I started digging into the HOA's public records, meeting minutes, budget reports, architectural committee decisions. It was all dry as dust, a monument to bureaucratic tedium. I was looking for a pattern, any hint of financial pressure or unusual activity. I found nothing. It felt like a dead end. Then I got a message. It was an anonymous email, short and to the point. It just said, "Check the property sale records for 312 Willow Creek Lane and ask Arthur why he's so quiet. Arthur, the nervous HOA vice president." And 312 Willow Creek Lane was the house directly behind mine. It had been on the market for months. I did what the email said. I went to the county clerk's website and looked up the property records. The house had just sold. 2 days before, Karen cut down the fort. The sale price was high, a record for the neighborhood. The buyer was a development corporation from out of state. Interesting, but not a smoking gun. The second part of the email was about Arthur. I thought about the meeting. Arthur had looked terrified. He couldn't get away from that microphone fast enough. He was a man who clearly wanted to be invisible. I decided to pay him a visit. I found his address in the HOA directory. He lived in a small, tidy house at the other end of the neighborhood. When I knocked on his door, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Mark," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" "I just have a few questions, Arthur," I said, keeping my voice low and calm. "About the house on Willow Creek?" His face went pale. He tried to shut the door, but I put my hand on it. Not hard, just enough to keep it open. "I'm not here to cause trouble for you, Arthur. I'm here for my nephew. He's an 8-year-old kid with a broken leg. He deserves to know why, and I think you know." He hesitated, then seemed to deflate. He let me in. His house was immaculate, everything in its place. He was a man who liked order. It was obvious that the chaos Karen had unleashed was tearing him apart. We sat in his living room. He wouldn't make eye contact. He just stared at his hands. "She bullied us all," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The whole board. If you disagreed with her, she'd make your life a living hell. Finding you for nonsense, denying your requests for a new fence or a paint color. She had everyone terrified." "What about the house behind me, Arthur?" I pressed gently. "What's the connection?" He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and shame. "The buyers," he said, "they were very particular. They loved the house, but they had one condition. They wanted an unobstructed view of the lake. Our neighborhood backed up to a small lake. It was the main selling point, and the house on Willow Creek had a prime view, or it did, except for a small section of its line of sight. A section that was now blocked by 2 large oak trees and a newly constructed fort. Ours sat along the side yard that faces the lake, right in that narrow sight line. My Fort Kickbot. Arthur got up and went to his desk. He came back with a plain manila envelope and handed it to me. "She was getting a kickback," he said, the words spilling out in a rush. "A consultant's fee," she called it. $10,000 from the real estate agent if the sale went through at the asking price. The buyers were about to walk because of the view. They said your fort was an eyesore that ruined the natural aesthetic. The agent called Karen in a panic. Karen promised she would resolve the sightline issue personally. I opened the envelope. Inside were printouts, text messages between Karen Dunn and the real estate agent, emails between Karen and the buyer's representative. It was all there in black and white, cold, calculating, and utterly damning. Need to clear the view at 310. The structure is an unapproved build. Taking direct action tomorrow morning. Consider the sightlines clean. Another one read, the bonus is contingent on a clear view. I will handle it. Tell the buyers to get their checkbook ready. There was no mention of a child, no mention of safety, just a cold focus on property, views, and money. It wasn't about the HOA rules at all. It was about a secret greedy side deal. The fort wasn't an eyesore to her. It was an obstacle to a $10,000 payday. I sat there reading the words, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't an act of a power-crazed HOA president. This was a crime motivated by pure, simple greed. She weighed the life and safety of my nephew against a stack of cash. And she chose the cash. The anger I felt was so pure, so intense, it was almost serene. This was the motive. This was the why. Arthur was watching me, wringing his hands. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have said something sooner. I was afraid I looked at him. A small man caught in a big mess. He wasn't a villain. He was just weak. But he had finally done the right thing. You did the right thing now, Arthur, I said, standing up. Thank you. I took the envelope. This changed everything. This elevated the case from assault to something far more deliberate and sinister. I walked out of his house and into the afternoon sun, the evidence heavy in my hand. Karen Dunn hadn't just broken the rules. She had broken the law for profit. And now I had the proof. We weren't just going to get justice for Evan's broken leg. We were going to dismantle her entire corrupt world. With the leaked texts in hand, our case took on a whole new dimension. This wasn't just about a reckless act anymore. It was premeditated. It was about money. I handed everything over to the district attorney's office. The prosecutor assigned to the case, a sharp woman named Miss Davies, looked at the text messages and her eyes lit up with a kind of righteous fire. This, she said, tapping the printouts, is the ball game. The criminal charges were amended. Prosecutors filed felony assault charges. New, more serious charges related to committing a crime for financial gain were being considered. But the legal system, as I well know, moves at its own pace. In the meantime, there was the practical matter of the fort and Evan's medical bills. That's where insurance was supposed to come in. We filed a claim against Karen Dunn's homeowner's insurance policy. It's standard procedure. If your neighbor's tree falls on your house, their insurance pays. If your neighbor's negligence causes an injury on your property, their insurance is supposed to cover it. We figured it was a slam dunk. We had video evidence, a police report, and a mountain of medical bills. We sent it all in and waited. A few weeks later, a thick envelope arrived. It was from her insurance company. I opened it expecting a settlement offer, or at least a request for more information. Instead, it was a denial of claim, a flat-out rejection. I read the letter, my brow furrowing. It was full of legal jargon, clauses, and sub-clauses. But the gist of it was simple, and it came down to 2 words: willful act. My sister was devastated. What does that even mean? She asked, looking at the pile of bills on her kitchen table. How can they not pay? Their client almost killed my son. I sat her down and explained it in the simplest terms I could. Think of it like this, I said. Homeowner's insurance is for accidents. It's for the oops moments in life. A water pipe bursts. A tree gets struck by lightning and falls on your fence. A guest slips on a wet step you forgot to dry. Those are accidents. The insurance company pays because you didn't mean for it to happen. I picked up a pen from the table. Now let's say you get angry at your neighbor. So, you take a baseball bat, walk over to his house, and you smash his window on purpose. That's not an accident. You meant to do it. That's a willful act, an intentional act of destruction. Her eyes widened as she understood. So, they're saying because Karen meant to cut down the fort. Exactly. I finished. Because she intentionally took a saw to the structure, the insurance company is washing their hands of it. Their policy, like almost all policies, has an exclusion for intentional or criminal acts. They are essentially saying, we don't insure crime. They won't pay for the damage to the fort, and they won't pay for Evans's medical bills. They are leaving her to face the consequences all on her own. It was, in a strange way, a victory. It meant Karen Dunn had no corporate safety net. There was no big insurance company that was going to write a check and make this all go away. If we were going to get compensation for Evan, we would have to get it directly from her. It put immense pressure on our civil lawsuit. The criminal case would punish her, put her in jail hopefully. But the civil case was what would pay for the surgeries, the physical therapy, the psychological counseling Evan now needed. It was what would hold her financially accountable for the hole she had blown in our lives. The insurance denial also had another effect. It made Karen more desperate. She had to hire her own lawyers for the civil case now, paying out of her own pocket. The financial walls were closing in on her. And desperate people do desperate things. We started hearing whispers around the neighborhood. Stories of Karen making angry phone calls, leaving rambling, threatening voicemails for people on the HOA board. Her world was collapsing, and she was lashing out at everyone she could blame. Paul kept his doorbell camera running 24/7. I made sure my sister and Evan were never home alone. We were on alert, waiting for her next irrational move. The legal battle was moving from a single front to two. The DA was handling the criminal side. Our civil attorney was handling the financial side. My job was to stay vigilant, to protect my family, and to keep gathering information. The insurance letter was a key piece of that puzzle. It confirmed what we already knew in our hearts. This was no accident. This was a deliberate act of malice. And now the perpetrator was financially cornered. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. I knew she wouldn't just sit there and accept her fate. She was going to strike again. We just had to be ready when she did. Karen Dunn's desperation became a palpable force in our lives. With her insurance company abandoning her and the criminal charges mounting, she was flailing. Her first mistake was the gym. Her next one was even more foolish, and it was aimed directly at the heart of our case, our star witness, Mrs. Gwynn. Mrs. Gwynn was the linchpin. She was the calm, credible elderly woman who saw everything with her own two eyes. Her testimony, combined with the video, was devastating. Karen's lawyers knew it, and apparently so did Karen's family. The attempt at intimidation was clumsy, but no less terrifying for it. It didn't come from Karen directly. She was out on bail again under even stricter conditions, but she was smart enough not to make the move herself. She sent her nephew. He was a younger version of her son Kyle. Same angry eyes, same entitled swagger. We found out later he had a minor criminal record. He was the family goon. He chose his moment carefully. Mrs. Gwynn did her grocery shopping every Tuesday morning at the same local market. It was part of her routine. He must have followed her. He cornered her in the parking lot as she was loading her groceries into her car. Luckily, he wasn't the only one with a routine. Paul also did his shopping on Tuesday mornings. He was parked just 2 rows over, sitting in his car, finishing a phone call before he went inside. And Paul, being the methodical IT guy he is, had a dash cam, not just a forward-facing one, but a dual camera system that also recorded the interior and a wide view out the side windows. It was always running. He didn't even think about it. It was just there, a silent digital witness. The dash cam footage was chilling. The audio was faint, but the video was perfectly clear. You see Mrs. Gwynn putting a bag of oranges in her trunk? Then the nephew, a big hulking kid in a hoodie, walks up to her. He gets too close, invading her personal space. You can see her recoil, her body language screaming fear. He leans in and starts talking. His gestures are aggressive. He points his finger in her face. He's trying to scare a woman in her late 70s. Paul saw it happening in his rearview mirror. He ended his call immediately. He didn't get out of the car. He didn't confront the nephew. He just watched, made sure his camera had a clear view, and hit the save event button on his dash cam, making sure the file wouldn't be overwritten. He knew that the video evidence would be far more powerful than his intervention. The nephew finally backed off, gave her one last threatening look, and sauntered away. Mrs. Gwynn was so shaken she dropped her keys. Paul waited until he was gone, then got out and walked over to her. "Are you all right, Mrs. Gwynn?" She was pale and trembling. "That boy," she stammered. He said I should be careful that old people can have accidents. That maybe my memory isn't so good. He said it would be a shame if something happened before I had a chance to correct my statement to the police. It was classic witness intimidation, vile, cowardly, and a serious felony. Paul helped her finish with her groceries and made sure she got home safely. Then he called me. "Mark, you need to see this." I went over to his house. He played the dash cam video for me on his computer. We watched it once without sound, just the stark visuals of a young bully menacing an old woman. Then we watched it again with the audio enhanced. You could just make out the words. "Forget what you think you saw," and would be a real shame. It was more than enough. I called Deputy Torres. Not the main police line, but his direct extension. I sent him the video file. He called me back within 10 minutes. His voice was cold steel. I've seen enough. He said this is a flagrant violation of her bail conditions. Even if she sent her nephew, she's responsible. It's called conspiracy. The legal machinery kicked into high gear. Torres forwarded the video to the DA's office. Miss Davies, the prosecutor, immediately filed an emergency motion to revoke Karen Dunn's bail. An emergency hearing was held the next day. It was short and brutal. Our lawyer was there. Miss Davies was there. Mrs. Gwynn was there looking frail but resolute. Karen and her lawyer were there looking stunned. Miss Davies played the dash cam video for the judge. The courtroom was silent. The judge, a stern-faced woman who looked like she'd seen it all, watched the video without expression. When it was over, she looked at Karen Dunn. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Miss Dunn, bail is a privilege, not a right. It is granted with the understanding that the defendant will not pose a danger to the community and will not interfere with the judicial process. You have, through your agent, done both. You have attempted to intimidate a key witness in your own felony trial. This is an egregious offense against the very foundation of our justice system. She didn't even wait for the defense lawyer to speak. She banged her gavel once. A sharp final sound. Bail is revoked. The defendant will be remanded into custody until the date of her trial. 2 deputies stepped forward. They cuffed Karen Dunn right there in the courtroom. The look on her face was one of pure, unadulterated shock. She had thought she was untouchable. She had thought she could bend the world to her will. But the world, it turned out, had rules that even she couldn't break. They led her away. She was no longer the powerful HOA president. She was just another inmate in an orange jumpsuit. As we walked out of the courthouse, Mrs. Gwynn took my arm. Her hand was still a little shaky, but her voice was strong. She picked the wrong old lady to mess with, she said, a little smile playing on her lips. I smiled back. Yes, ma'am. She certainly did. The attempt to silence our witness had backfired spectacularly. It had not only failed, but it had landed Karen Dunn in a jail cell where she would stay until she faced a jury. Her power was gone. Her freedom was gone. Next on the list was her title. With Karen in county, the board finally grew a spine. Arthur called a special meeting. Owners could observe if we kept quiet, so Paul and I hugged the back wall. Quorum present, Arthur said, voice steady. Motion to remove Karen Dunn for conduct harmful to the association. Second, the accountant read a memo. Keep her and the carrier drops our coverage. That landed like a brick. All in favor? 3 ayes. Her last ally stared at his shoes, then switched sides. I gavelled done. Audit approved. Fear left the room like smoke through a vent. The criminal trial was a matter for the state. A slow-moving train that would eventually arrive at its destination. Karen Dunn would face a jury for her crimes, and I had no doubt she would be found guilty. But for Evan, for my sister, the more immediate and personal battle was the civil trial. This was where we would hold Karen accountable for the real-world consequences of her actions, the medical bills, the trauma, the long road to recovery. This was about making us whole again. Our lawyer, a calm, methodical man named Ben Carter, had prepared our case meticulously. He explained that in a civil trial, the burden of proof is lower than in a criminal one. We didn't need to prove her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. We just needed to show that a preponderance of the evidence pointed to her being responsible for Evan's injuries. Given our mountain of evidence, this was a bar we could easily clear. The trial took place in a small, modern courtroom. It felt less intimidating than the criminal court, but the stakes felt higher to me. Karen was there, brought in from the county jail, wearing a plain gray suit instead of an orange jumpsuit. She looked smaller, diminished, stripped of her power and authority. She sat beside her lawyer, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Our case was straightforward. Ben presented the facts clearly and logically. He started with the foundation, the HOA bylaws. He showed that while the HOA had rules about structures, it also had a clear process for violations, a written warning, a fine, and then, if necessary, legal action. There was nothing in the rules that gave the president the authority to personally take a saw to a resident's property. He was establishing that she hadn't just acted maliciously. She had acted far outside the scope of her own rules. Then he brought out the evidence. He played the doorbell camera video on a large screen for the jury to see. The courtroom was silent as we all watched the terrible event unfold again. You could see jurors flinch when the fort collapsed. He then played the audio from Deputy Torres's body cam, where Karen admitted to cutting it down, shouting her flimsy excuses. He presented Mrs. Gwynn's testimony. She was a perfect witness, calm and grandmotherly, her voice filled with quiet conviction as she described what she saw. He presented the text messages, proving her financial motive. He was building a wall of evidence brick by brick, so high and so solid that the defense couldn't possibly climb over it. The most powerful moment of the trial, however, involved Evan. Ben and the child psychologist had decided it would be too traumatic for Evan to testify in person. The court agreed. Instead, we had recorded a deposition with him a few weeks earlier. It was done in a quiet room with just Ben, the defense lawyer, and a court reporter present. Ben had been wonderful with him, asking simple, direct questions in a gentle voice. Now that video was played for the jury. On the screen, Evan sat in a chair, his bright red cast propped up on a stool. He looked small and vulnerable, but his voice was clear. "Can you tell us your name?" Ben asked. "Evan," he said. "And how old are you, Evan?" "I'm 8. Ben asked him about the fort. Evan's face lit up. "Me and my Uncle Mark built it. It was Fort Kickbutt. It was the best fort ever." Then Ben's voice got softer. "Evan, can you tell us what happened to your fort?" Evan's smile faded. He looked down at his cast. "The shaky lady came," he said. "It was what he called Karen now. She had a loud buzzing thing. She cut the fort's leg. It got wobbly and it fell down on me." "Did it hurt?" Ben asked. Evan nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "Yeah, a lot." The video ended. There wasn't a dry eye on the jury. An 8-year-old boy, in his own simple, honest words, had just told them everything they needed to know. The defense lawyer's arguments were weak. He tried to claim Karen was under stress. He tried to argue that the fort was a safety hazard itself. He tried to paint me as a negligent guardian. The jury saw right through it. They had seen the video. They had heard Evan. After 2 days of testimony, the lawyers gave their closing arguments. Ben summarized our case, ending with a picture of Evan in his hospital bed. "This was not an accident," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "This was a choice made by that woman for her own selfish reasons. Now it is your turn to make a choice. The choice to hold her accountable." The jury was out for less than an hour. When they came back, the foreman stood up. He was a man about my age, a construction worker by the looks of his callous hands. He looked directly at Karen Dunn. On the question of liability, he said, "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff." A wave of relief washed over me. We had won, but it wasn't over. The foreman continued. "We award damages for medical expenses, past and future, in the amount of $150,000. For pain and suffering, we award $500,000, and for punitive damages, to punish the defendant for her malicious conduct, we award an additional $1 million. As state law requires, the judge later reviewed the punitive award. A gasp went through the courtroom. The total was staggering. It was a number designed to send a message that our community represented by this jury would not tolerate this kind of behavior. Karen Dunn just slumped in her chair, her face ashen. She had lost everything. Her reputation, her freedom, her power, and now her financial future. The verdict wouldn't undo what she had done. It wouldn't magically heal Evan's leg or erase his nightmares. But it was justice. It was a clear, unambiguous statement that what she did was wrong and that she would pay for it. For the first time in months, I felt like we could finally start to heal. The legal battles were over. Now it was time to rebuild. The day after the civil trial verdict was a Saturday. The sun was out. The air was crisp. It felt like the first real day of peace we'd had in a long time. The legal storm had passed. Karen Dunn was gone from our lives, a problem for the county and the bankruptcy courts. Now her house already had a for sale sign on the lawn put there by the bank. But there was still a hole in our yard, a patch of flattened grass and sad memories where Fort Kickbutt used to stand. I had promised Evan we would rebuild it, stronger than before. I thought it would be just the two of us again, a quiet project to reclaim what we had lost. I was wrong. I was outside that morning clearing the last of the debris when Paul came over carrying his circular saw. "Figured you could use an extra hand," he said with a nod. Before I could even thank him, another neighbor, Buddy Bruno, a cheerful, loud guy who told the worst jokes, came rolling a wheelbarrow down the sidewalk. It was full of bags of concrete mix. "You're not setting those posts in dirt, are you, Mark?" he boomed. "Got to do it right. Foundation first." And then they just kept coming. People from up and down the street. Some brought tools. Some brought lumber they had left over in their garages. Mrs. Gwynn came out with a picture of lemonade and a plate of cookies, appointing herself the foreman of morale. The young mother from the HOA board brought her 2 kids who were eager to help carry small pieces of wood. It wasn't my project anymore. It was the neighborhood's. We cleared the site. We dug new, deeper holes for the posts. Buddy Bruno mixed concrete while telling a long, terrible story about a talking dog. We all groaned at the punchline, but we were all smiling. It felt good to work together, to build something positive on a spot that had seen so much ugliness. We were literally replacing a bad memory with a good one. Around noon, a familiar cruiser pulled up to the curb. It was Deputy Torres. He was off duty, wearing jeans and a polo shirt. He got out, and with him was another officer, a K9 handler, and with the handler was a beautiful German shepherd with intelligent, happy eyes. The dog, whose name was Rocket, immediately started chasing a tennis ball with the neighborhood kids, a furry, 4-legged diplomat, bringing joy to the block. Torres walked over to me carrying a small, heavy cardboard box. "Heard you were building something," he said, a rare smile on his face. He handed me the box. I opened it. It was full of heavy-duty galvanized carriage bolts, nuts, and washers. The expensive kind. "The guys at the station took up a collection," he said quietly. "We see a lot of bad stuff in our job. It's good to see a community come together and fix something for a change." I was speechless. I just shook his hand. It was more than just bolts. It was a sign that the whole community, even the law enforcement that protected it, was invested in our healing. We worked all day. Paul, with his IT precision, made sure every cut was perfect. I, with my Army experience, made sure the structure was sound enough to withstand a hurricane. Everyone found a job. We were a team, a well-oiled machine fueled by lemonade and a shared sense of purpose. Evan, with his bright red cast, couldn't do any heavy lifting, so we made him the chief inspector. He sat in a lawn chair, a toy hard hat on his head, and pointed out everything we were doing right. "That board is super straight, Uncle Mark. Good job, Buddy Bruno. That concrete is very concretey." Late in the afternoon, we were ready to install the final plank on the roof. I had bought a special can of paint earlier in the week, bright fire engine red. It was Evan's choice. He had signed his name on the plank with a black marker. I climbed the ladder and held the board in place. Paul drilled the pilot holes, and I drove the big galvanized bolts, Deputy Torres's bolts, home. The last plank was secure. The fort was finished. It was bigger and stronger than the first one. The posts were set in concrete. The frame was held together with steel. It had 2 windows instead of 1, and a small deck with a rope ladder. It was magnificent. Evan, using his good leg and his strong arms, scrambled up that ladder faster than I thought possible. He stood on the deck of his new castle, beaming. His smile was brighter than the sun. He looked out at all the neighbors gathered on the lawn, all the people who had come together to help him. "Thank you," he yelled, his voice full of pure 8-year-old joy. Everyone cheered. It was more than just a fort. It was a monument. A monument to resilience, a testament to the fact that when one person tries to tear something down, a dozen good people will show up to build it back up better than before. We had taken a place of trauma and transformed it into a place of triumph. The healing had begun. Months passed. The oaks went orange and gold, then bare, then white with snow. Our new treehouse wore a snow cap like a crown. Evan's cast came off. He worked hard in therapy, jaw set, eyes bright. Soon he was climbing again, the fall turning into a story he told his friends with a grin. The street found its rhythm. Arthur turned out to be a good HOA president. Fair, quiet, a little boring. That was perfect. Karen Dunn's house sold to a young family. Their kids and Evan race bikes under the oaks. The lake view was still there, now framed by a sturdy, well-loved fort. The court pieces settled, too. Faced with the videos, the texts, and the witness, Karen took a plea. She admitted to felony assault and went to prison. Kyle got probation for waving the gun at the meeting. The nephew took a misdemeanor for scaring Mrs. Gwynn. Not perfect justice, but real and enough. Life turned normal again. School bells, homework, dinners that started on time. I fixed gutters, sharpened blades, and stayed the steady hand I promised to be. The cold anger that carried me cooled into something simple. We did our job. We protected our own. Spring came soft and green. One evening, I stopped at the big hardware store off the highway. I needed wood screws for a bookshelf Evan wanted. The aisle was quiet, lights humming. When I looked up, she was there at the far end, Karen Dunn, holding a small can of paint thinner. I hadn't seen her since the trials. Later, I heard she'd been paroled for good behavior. She looked different. No power suit, just jeans, a jacket, gray at the temples. Tired, not fierce, not big. We stared across the bins of nuts and bolts. 1,000 words could have started. None did. No speech, no anger, just a nod from her. A nod from me. That was all. I turned back to the screws, found the right size, and walked to the register. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The storm had passed. Justice isn't always a shout. Sometimes it's the quiet that stays. At home, Evan sat under the red plank and read a comic. Legs swinging, scar fading to a pale line. Our neighbors talked about gardens and fishing, not court dates. The fort stood tight on its posts. Carriage bolts bright in the sun. Gifts from a squad of cops who showed up on their day off because they cared. How far will a man go to defend his own? All the way you have to. You stand firm. You gather proof. You keep your people safe. And then you go home, sand the shelf edges smooth, and set out the screws because life goes.